Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. On the Wildlife Wire today, we have, and I'm not even sure if we is correct. I guess I have a special guest because my co-host isn't here as a co-host, but instead a person who knows a plethora of information around species named furbearers. And that guest, Samantha Miller, most time host of the Wildlife Wire, but today special guest, Sam Miller, Samantha Miller. First, I want to know, what is it that you do when you're not on the Wildlife Wire? Then tell us a little bit about these species called furbearers, whatever that means, and we will dive in from there. But thank you and welcome, Samantha Miller.
Wow. It is such a treat to be welcomed to my own podcast by none other than Mark Searles. I am honored. I feel instantly famous. And oh my gosh, I am just overwhelmed with how amazing this is. When I'm not doing the Wildlife Wire, I am living in Colorado, up in the mountains, in the middle of nowhere, in the
Mountains
town
that
of.
probably are getting snow, right? A little bit here and there.
Yeah, we're getting a little snow. I live in Grand Lake, so at about 8,400 feet, right outside Rocky Mountain National Park. We've got elk doing elk rutting stuff now, so we've been going to the park and trying to listen for elk. We've got hunting season underway, so I know that a lot of folks are doing that around here right now. I am not. I did that once, and it was a lot of work and not my favorite thing to do. So I no longer do that, but there are others who do it. So I am actually right now in my off time. I've been riding my horse. I've been fishing, and then of course I have a real job. Mark, I know you think the Wildlife Wire is how I make all of the big dough.
You have a supplemental job.
Yeah, I have a supplemental gig in the lucrative nonprofit world. And I work for the Center for Biological Diversity as their senior carnivore campaigner. And that means I work on carnivore policy issues on the state level across the country, beyond Colorado. Although I do focus a lot of my work right here in Colorado.
Well, that's amazing. And why would you focus in Colorado versus other states?
Well, Colorado is really cool in a lot of different ways. It's cool in that we have so much biodiversity here. We have a variety of landscapes. It's my favorite state, dare I say, of
Mm,
all of the states. It's a pretty awesome place to live. I think that a lot of people move here just for how awesome it is to be outside here. You can ski, you can backpack, you can do both in the same day sometimes.
you can even, I saw a news story, you can even uh, base jump from the top of a mountain in Aspen to look at the fall colors.
Mark, I wasn't going to touch on how I do that in my spare time, but I'm glad you brought it up. Yes, you can. You can absolutely do that. You can do so many things. But Colorado is also really cool politically, and that we do still have state representatives from either side of the aisle that'll work together on issues, which I like. Let's keep it that way. We have a lot of different overlapping environmental policies that come into play when we think about different species of animals. And we have a lot of people who care about the wild because they like to base jump or they like just seeing it or they like going hunting or fishing. So there are a lot of people here who are invested in wild animals. So that makes my work really fun. And it means that I get to drive around in my truck and go to all of the different meetings and meet with advocates and other stakeholders in person, which is something I love doing. In-person conversations are the best.
Turns out that's what we've been doing for thousands of years, and we're pretty good at it. It's
Are
this
we?
whole uh, you know, anonymous social media yell at each other thing that's kind of brand new.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't want to reveal my troll name, so I guess we'll save that for later. There's nothing more fun than going on online and spreading misinformation on interest boards and all of that fun stuff.
Interest boards.
Interest boards. Those those base jumping forums on the interweb.
Well, before our listeners lose interest and become bored,
Okay.
I want to
Whatever.
dive into why we are here today and why I am interviewing you. And that is for these animals named fur bearers. Those who bear fur, but for who? Why are they called fur bearers? And who are these species that are listed as fur bearers?
Well, Mark, if there is one thing that I could change, it would be the name of fur bearers. And I say that with air quotes because fur bearers are a variety of species from a ton of different biological backgrounds that have little to nothing in common other than the fact that humans, like to kill them for their fur. So their fur is deemed as having commercial value or having value to humans. So therefore, they are fur bearers. In Colorado, that's 17 species, ranging from the elusive ringtail, which is like this tiny little fox, squirrel, raccoon-looking hybrid that has a little tail like a lemur. It's a very cute animal. And they're in southwestern Colorado. That's a fur bearer. So is a beaver. A beaver is also a fur bearer, a bobcat, a pine marten or Pacific marten is a fur bearer. So we've got a variety of species under one umbrella, all quote unquote, again, I'll say words like managed, and I'll try to define them as I go, managed or killed for their fur.
So nothing to do with where they live, nothing to do with what they eat, nothing to do with what scientific family they are a part of. They are a collection of misfits, but beautiful, amazing characters in their own right that we decided to put together because we want to kill them for their fur. Do we have meat bearers?
we do not have meat bearers. We do have big game, which is another title I'm sure I'd love to change to, where it turns hunting animals into, video game like status, where we say, oh, this is a big game we play with other animals' lives. Things I would change if I could, if I were queen for the day. But we have fur bearers, and you actually don't have to eat their meat. That's a big difference between big game species and fur bearer species, is that for fur bearers, you don't even have to harvest. And again, harvest is an agency term. You don't have to harvest their meat. You just have to use their fur. So fur bearers are managed in a really interesting way. And are you ready to hear how they're managed, Mark?
I am.
Okay, guess how many ringtails you can kill.
2.
As many as you want. Guess how many bobcats you can kill.
3.
As many as you want. Guess how many beavers you can kill. You want to keep playing this game? We can
I'm
keep
catching
going.
on. It sounds like whatever your heart desires is how many you can kill within a certain time frame. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 6 months out of the year. That very small window of time, running from November to March of the year. And most states have a similar fur bearer season to that, where it reflects when fur coats are getting a little bit thicker because of winter, so they're more desirable. And thus, trappers may purchase a fur bearer license. That license is $35, right around there. If you're from out of state, we do charge you $100. So you could come up and say, hey, I'd like to buy all your bobcats in Colorado for a $100 bill. And Colorado would say, that's a deal. Fair trade. So you can do that in our state. And then once you buy that fur bearer permit, that's to trap, or that small game hunting permit, which would be to hunt or shoot fur bearers, you can kill as many as you want of any of these species.
Is that how it works in other states as well, as far as one license for all of these? And is it typically unlimited?
In a lot of states, it is. Unfortunately, fur bearers are some of the species that have been the least regulated since state wildlife agency inceptions. Some states have better regulations than Colorado, where there's some quotas in some areas for animals like bobcats. Montana has some bobcat specific quotas. New Mexico, is it New Mexico or Arizona? You may remember this better than I do. One of those two states doesn't allow out of state trapping to occur. Do you remember which one that was? If not, I'll
I
look it
believe
up.
it's New Mexico.
Yeah, so there's limits there. New Mexico also doesn't allow trapping on public lands. So you don't have to worry about seeing an animal in a trap or getting one of your domestic animals caught in trap in public lands in New Mexico. But in most states, it's perfectly legal to set these traps out across public lands. Colorado doesn't allow for killing traps or traps that can hold an animal in place by their foot, those foothold traps, unless you've got a private landowner permit. So there's some nuance there. But we do allow for cage traps and non-killing traps. States like Montana, our favorite, Wyoming, and Idaho all allow for snares. Utah allows for snares to kill mountain lions, even. Montana will allow for snares for wolf trapping and consider wolves as one of those fur bearer species where you can go ahead and have at it. They do have a statewide quota there. So, there's things going on there, but
There are many ways to value wildlife. Uh, on more of a belief system, values, moral system than a monetary way. But that being said, agencies assign a monetary value to wildlife, and it seems that $35 to kill an unlimited number of 17 different species really sends a poor message. Would you agree with that statement?
yeah, I think that in Colorado, we have an enterprise agency. That means that they're supposed to run to fund themselves and to make money. And this is it is it's a complete failure for them economically to sell permits this way, even if we're bare minimum valuing wildlife. I think $35 is absurd. I don't know a single person in Colorado who would say, "Oh yeah, I'd make that trade." Just a random person off the street. I think if I did a street poll and said, "Hey, how would you think a deal of killing as many bobcats for $35? Do you think that's fair?" I don't think people would think that's fair. It doesn't make common sense. It's not sensical. It's absurd. So that's why I've really took an interest in fur bearers, because they're a set of species whose regulations have not changed since the 1900s. And we continue to allow this kind of excessive trapping despite all of these species in very individual and different lives. We've got everything from vegan beavers, beavers aren't eating anything, to
I thought they
mesocarnivores.
were predatory. Isn't that what you're telling me?
I did. Yeah, Oregon actually had a predatory clause on beavers and coyotes, which allowed them to be killed in different ways. Beavers have since been removed from that predatory clause. I know you were worried. Coyotes are still there, Mark. They're still
That was a close one.
very predatory because, so beavers were on there because they predate on trees. They prey on trees. So those predatory beavers are out there chewing on
Oh
trees.
my God, that hurts my brain. So, and cows predate on grass, bison
No, no, no.
predate on
What?
grass.
What?
Uh,
Cows don't predate on anything. Gosh, you know that. They've got hooves. They're fine.
ah, there it
Uh,
is.
I digress, but I'm sure a beaver could predate on a pasture somewhere where we want to water animals from. There are And in Colorado, we call those species nuisance species. Instead of predatory animals, we have a whole list of nuisance species, and most of them are fur bearers. And it's saying these are species that you could come in conflict with, and therefore you can kill them even more in different ways. So there's all these different additive levels of mortality happening, different ways these animals are dying beyond this unlimited trapping. And so when you put it all together, you end up with this ecological disaster that is our state trapping program and trapping programs really across the country, and small game, small fur bearers. Anything with an unlimited number of licenses sold, you've got to start questioning what's the scientific integrity behind this management model.
Yeah, it seems like a failure on many levels in that it, because agencies are enterprise agencies, meaning that they're trying to self-fund as much as possible, and you're taking 17 species and then allowing them to be killed in unlimited number by one $35 permit. Well, that's not very enterprising. Uh, that seems like they could wrangle up some more cash by modifying that into individual uh, licenses or tags for those species. Maybe not allowing an unlimited number, and then you mentioned the nuisance part. So we're not valuing them monetarily, and we're also giving them this another negative values term as nuisance. I mean, wrapping it all together, one could easily draw the conclusion that they have no kind of value, whether that's monetary or otherwise, in the minds of state agencies. Would that be a fair conclusion to draw from these policies?
Yeah, I think it is really fair. I think the policies tell that story. I think that agency staff wouldn't agree that these animals have no value, but the policies as they're being implemented, that's the story the policies tell. And so if agency staff really do value these animals, they should be changing and advocating for changing these policies, at least giving species specific quotas. With animals like swift fox, for example, they're a species of greatest conservation need in Colorado. We know that we don't have that many swift fox, and yet you can hunt or trap and kill as many swift fox as you would like, despite how fragile their population numbers are. So I think that we've got a lot of concerns around all of these species. We have added population, added pressures on their habitat, changes from climate that are impacting them. And yet we are the greatest driver of mortality here. We're causing the most pressure to these animals, even in a time of biodiversity crisis. We still kill as many as we feel like it. And by we, I mean we've got 17,000 permits in our state for small game fur bearer combo licenses and for fur bearer licenses. So that's 17,000 individuals out of millions of people in our state, 17,000 licenses. So that's in-state, out-of-state licenses.
And so back to the mortality piece, are these species being hunted? Are they being trapped? Does it vary species to species? Are there dogs involved? Tell me how
Yes.
this is working.
Yes to all of the above. Yes to all of the above. So these species, if you're a fur bearer, you can be trapped. Those traps are holding traps. There is a 48-hour trap check time. So it's really 2 days. You've got to check your trap once a day. But once a day can be from the morning one day to the end of the next day. So that ends up being closer to 48 hours than 24 hours. So you've got a panicked wild animal held in a trap, waiting for whatever trapper to come check that trap. And then that animal is then killed by the trapper and skinned for its fur. You can also shoot these animals. So some people will set up shop by a beaver lodge and just wait for them to emerge from the water and shoot entire beaver families that they take issue with or they want their fur. So you can also shoot an unlimited number of fur bearers. You can chase fur bearers with dogs and corner them. So Hounding is allowed. You cannot kill them with hounds, but you can certainly tree a bobcat and shoot it from a tree. Or you could do the same with raccoons or skunks or other species labeled as a fur bearer. And then electronic calls are also allowed. So calls that mimic dead or dying prey of these animals or their young, those can be used too. And then on private land, you can use things like artificial light to hunt these animals too, which can be dangerous because a lot of times at night you're seeing as your vision's limited, and even with that light, you're pretty much spotlighting seeing eyes and shooting at the eyes. So there's a lot of issues in the way that we kill these animals, and again, there's no bag limit, which means there's no limit on how many you can kill. There's no possession limit, which means there's no limit on how many you can hold on to. And then the most egregious thing is that you can then sell these species at the end of the season. So unlike other big game, you can kill these animals not for food, take their fur, and then sell it for your own personal profit. So there's a financial incentive based on commercial markets for these animals too. So you may see 1,200 bobcats trapped and killed in Colorado one year as market prices go up. And then you may see 700 or so a year, prices go down. So we see commercial markets driving the killing of these species too. And I think it's a pretty low bar to say, hey, we should maybe not let commercial markets decide how many animals in Colorado we kill each year.
And doesn't that go, the majority of wildlife agencies, if not all, base their structure around the North American model of wildlife management. And one of the tenets in there is that wildlife should not be killed for commercial reasons. How does that square with this fur bearer program?
There's a lot of issues with the NAM. I think that most of the NAM is actually pretty good, the North American model. But fur trappers have managed to get a free ride on the backs of ethical hunters everywhere for a long time. And one of the ways they've done that is by lobbying outside groups like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Society, or by lobbying the Wildlife Society, or these other larger professional societies that agencies belong to. And they've really advocated saying, hey, fur trapping is a legitimate use, which is another portion of the North American model. They say it's legitimate to kill animals for fur to keep us warm. We,
Hmm.
we don't live in the 1800s anymore, Mark. I definitely take exception with that, but they've managed to prop up fur trapping as a legitimate use and get a free ride along with the North American model using that statement. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think it's a bunch of dudes from, from different areas who want to cosplay as frontiersmen, but, let them have their fun and let the world burn because, we're not keeping beavers in watersheds where they belong, is kind of it's really, really selfish at this point to continue acting like we can play pioneers men when we have real issues to deal with.
But so, so two scenarios here. The first one is, I would imagine that you're against, and I say that imagine as if I don't know the answer, against the commercial sale of these animals' fur. If that were to go away, are there people who derive their livelihood from these animals?
No one is deriving their livelihood from trapping wild animals. There are so many alternatives to fur out there now. There was a point in time where people were certainly making their livelihood on trapping wild animals. At that point in time, we almost completely wiped beavers off the face of the earth. So the North American beaver was almost extinct at that time. I think that we've shown that we are not capable of letting markets drive wildlife. We've seen that with bison. We've seen that with a lot of different bird species. that markets should not have a say in how wildlife are quote unquote managed. So no one's making their living off of this. People may make a few extra bucks. I mean, you've been to the fur auction. What are we at? We're at how much is a turd coyote pelt selling for these days?
$4.
There you go. So that's one
And she
animal.
said turd coyote pelt because that's what the gentleman there told me was a whole
That's
rack of turd.
right. And so the value that these people even are placing on the furs of these wild animals, they are labeling a whole rack of dead coyotes as turds. That to me is unacceptable.
Yeah,
And then so you
coyotes
might,
that had families that they were uh, in monogamous relationships with. They young that depend on them. We don't even get into uh, what happens when that coyote is not on the landscape anymore, and the social disruption for the other coyotes that may move in and vie for that territory. So yeah, there's a lot more than just a number, right? When we're killing these animals.
oh, absolutely. And I think that, I hope that our listeners know that when I say these things, it's because they're outrageous. The way that people treat these animals that have a very, very important part to play in our lives, in each of our daily lives. They matter to all of us in different ways. I think the benefits they go, I mean, just from beyond themselves, their intrinsic value, but the benefits they provide ecosystems writ large, they're completely devalued in this management process. So, from their individual lives, and we know like different coyotes, as Dr. Mark Beckhoff would say, might not go out one day because they have a headache. There's all of these little social lives and intricacies that happen between these animals. Foxes are really fun that way. Some fox species are polyamorous and they live in little colonies with sister wives. They've got two females, one male in one colony. Foxes can have babies from two different fathers at the same time, so they get more assistance for those babies from other male foxes in the area. They do all sorts of really cute things, fox-wise, where they take care of their young. Some of them will stay together forever in a larger family unit. So each of these species, you talked about coyotes, I talked about foxes, but every single one of these species has its own role, its own lives. Beavers do this too. And we totally disregard that and devalue that by saying these animals are only valued for their fur. And the people who are using them for their fur then only value them as turds on a rack. And that to me is disgusting. That's ridiculous. And that's where we've got to change the system.
Well, one person views turds on a rack as disgusting, but someone with a turd fetish may disagree with you. But everyone with a any kind of moral standing on the value of wildlife would agree that referring to an animal as turds and selling them for profit to go either in the States or beyond is absurd. What about, so we have a small percentage of the population that is killing these animals in unlimited numbers. Why does that matter though, right? I mean, if it was 3 million people killing in unlimited numbers, well, that's a really big problem. But if it's just a handful doing it, is it really, does it really need to change?
One of my favorite opposing biologists would say that that fur bearer regulations are regulated just by the quantity of trappers on the landscape, that there aren't enough trappers to do damage. And I certainly take exception with that because any one trapper could trap out an entire watershed. If we go and we remove beavers from one watershed, the ecosystem impacts are tremendous. They're felt far beyond just those beavers being lost. That's a full wetland that's lost years down the line. That's habitat for songbirds and for, waterfowl, and for angling and all of the other things that we enjoy for those of us that are birders. I bird. I like to be able to see all those species in an area. And there are two huge things that have shaped North America. One is glaciers, the other is beavers. Beavers create these incredible habitats and really move our water in different ways. So to say 17,000 permits does nothing, that's absurd. One permit does something, and one permit could be all the difference of one ecosystem. And so we should be looking at these things on an ecosystems basis, also on an individual basis. And we should have quotas for different animals and also consider whether recreational trapping should be happening at all. What's the value of that? If I look at a beaver's contribution in wildfires, we know across the West wildfires are raging. There's all of this excellent peer-reviewed research that shows how beavers mitigate wildfires and how beaver-managed watersheds are more resilient to these high-intensity wildfire complexes we've been seeing across the West, that they stay green, that they provide refugia. We've even had people take refuge in beaver watersheds during wildfires and survive, so other wild species go there, hunker down, and they don't burn. And that's something incredible that beavers do. So what's worth more, 35 bucks so this guy can trap out a whole family of beavers, or that whole ecosystem and all of those lives that are protected by that beaver managed watershed? And why aren't we asking those questions and weighing that out in our wildlife management?
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're looking at the amount of trappers versus the whole population of Colorado, it is a tiny amount. But then when you actually kind of visualize what does it look like to have 19,000 people out there trapping these animals, and if they're a decent trapper, in a substantial quantity, like that is a lot of people in the wildlands of Colorado, and we're looking at this, across the country that are out there changing these ecosystems. Like it doesn't take millions to participate. I mean, it can be, like you said, 1 or 100, and it could have a big impact. And I think that hits at a broader issue in wildlife management is uh, we tend to be too high level and look at state populations and state quotas and things like that instead of how are these policies affecting a watershed.
Right. And I think that populations-based model has caused a lot of errors in how we manage wildlife, and it often doesn't account for things beyond how we kill wildlife. It doesn't account for disease outbreaks. There are no kit foxes left in Colorado, no known population, and that was one disease outbreak, but we also trapped them. And we didn't account for that. And now that species is gone. And that was under the management of the same agency that manages species now. So we've got to change how we do things, or we could end up with no swift foxes or no ringtails. It is not unheard of to have these things happen because it only takes a few people really to have devastating impacts on localized populations. And CPW has no idea, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has no idea how many of these different species there are. I know you and I have both asked for bobcat population numbers to no avail in this state. They don't know. I keep hearing they're doing research on it, but we just don't know. And so we don't know the impacts we're causing different areas when we're trapping bobcats.
And so that leads me to your wish list.
Okay.
So, I think we can move beyond ideals and look at what kind of policy changes would be considered moderate or incremental, that could really help these species.
Well, Mark, I've got a couple things for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, one, no more commercial markets for fur bearers. We should not be selling our wildlife. No state should sell their wildlife this way. No one should just be killing an unlimited number of animals, and that just leaves it up to markets to decide how many are killed and sold. So that's one.
Did you say
That's the very
did you say leave it up to Marcus or markets? Because
markets. We don't want
who is Marcus and what is he
we
doing?
should not leave our wildlife management up to Marcus at the market. None. It's a very low bar held by Marcus. Let's keep that, let's put that bar in place. That would be my first takeaway. So that says, hey, if you like, oh, what? Are
I
you
think
letting
that
Marcus go now?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, a reasonable ask.
Thank you. And I think it says that, if you have this tradition of trapping that within your value system is important, it says, okay, that continues. But what does not continue is people who trap and sell for commercial markets for their own personal profit. So that's common sense reform numero uno. Numero dos, species-specific quotas and limits and population estimates. And if we don't know, then the precautionary principle should be applied.
And what is that?
Okay, so right now, our state is selling tickets to an all-you-can-eat buffet, but we have no idea how much of each dish is left. You just open the door and say, have at it. Instead, let's say, okay, let's check how much we have of each thing before we sell it away. Let's ask how many Western spotted skunks do we have? How many beavers do we have? Let's ask these questions before we start selling these animals, and then look at the realities of what selling them may be. We have game management units across the state. Most states do. Maybe certain units, we don't have trapping or fur bearer hunting in those units because we don't know how many animals there are there. And that's what the precautionary principle says. When you don't know, you don't kill. It's not when you don't know, we go full unlimited. We don't know, so might as well take as many as you want. It's we don't know, so let us think about it until we know enough to get back to you, which is responsible, I would say.
I like it.
Okay. So responsible, common sense. My other big thing I take issue with, and this is my last thing I'll vent about. I guess I have two more things I take issue with that I'll vent about, but there are several more. I'll stick with two for the sake of time today. Are you ready for my last two?
I'm ready.
Okay. Beavers. They are unique because they have orange teeth and they're huge rodents and they're very funny and they have big tails that they use to talk to each other. But they're also unique because of what they do for our climate and how they mitigate with wildfire. I would argue that we should not be recreationally trapping beavers in a time of a climate crisis, of these high-intensity wildfires, and in a time of mass biodiversity loss, that we can use all of the allies we can get, and they happen to be adorable, oversized rodents with big paddle tails, then yes, I will take them for free and not sell them away for $35 a beaver, or all the beavers for $35. So to me, beavers do a great job for our ecosystems. We should leave that alone. We should talk to private landowners and make, living with beavers easier. We should make translocation easier. Recreational trapping of beavers should be off the table. Are you ready for my last one?
That's a fair ask. Again, you seem to be doing a good job at coming here with logical arguments.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I haven't gotten to my illogical arguments, but I could save those for another episode. My last one is, if there is species of conservation need or of concern to the state, if we don't have a lot of data on them and the species says, ooh, it looks like we don't really know this number. We see that with swift foxes right now. We should not be recreationally trapping those animals either. We should study them. If we need more information on them, we should study them for a longer period of time. We should do that before we start trapping them. Pine martens are an example of that, or Pacific martens, where they were actually state endangered for several years. And then they were just allowed to be trapped in unlimited numbers again. And we still
That
don't know.
on-off switch is quite drastic.
Right, right. And so, thinking about that species, and they are suffering from massive habitat fragmentation, and they have very specific habitat requirements. So, looking at a species like that and saying, hey, that species is pretty rare, let's maybe not trap it for fun. Um, those are the questions I would like the state to be asking itself. And I would like the legislature to be asking those questions. And I would like the public to be pushing for answers to those questions. Because if the state can't provide answers, if they don't have justifications for their own management practices, then what are we doing here? We should be changing these things. And they've been going on for far too long to the benefit of few humans and to the great detriment of many wild species.
Yeah, sometimes the states do these species-specific uh, studies. So, there's one on bobcats, a high hunting area versus a area of virtual no hunting or trapping, and then not a lot of information is being used from that. What I would be really interested in is if a state ever said, we're not going to allow any hunting or trapping of any species in this particular area and study. The first would be like, oh, well, you could just go to Rocky Mountain National Park and get that information. But I would love to see how you could do a whole ecosystem impact of, well, we stopped in management area 542, and over 5 years, we noticed this difference in the amount of aspen trees that were there, or like, really look at what we're doing at a much larger scale in a small area. And I think, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption would be the states would say, well, it costs too much money. And then they probably just don't want to do that because they don't really want to have to fight against their own policies, right? They're not going to want to say, well, actually, yeah, we saw what happens when we stop this stuff, and it turns out the ecosystems are resilient, and that they can be more resilient against climate change and fires and all of this. So we just aren't going to do any studies at all like this.
Well, yeah, if it costs too much money, then maybe don't trap them this time. I always say, okay, what if we did a study that was like, how about we don't kill foxes this time? Most of the time, the state will always contrast those kinds of studies by areas of higher trapping or hunting, so that way they can give, quote unquote, give their constituents, hunters, trappers, more in another area when they take something away from one area. And really, this isn't about. It becomes wildlife management for a certain subset of people rather than wildlife management for the sake of the animal. We're not benefiting any beavers by trapping and killing beavers, right? And we're certainly not benefiting other animals. And we're not benefiting a lot of recreationists who use beaver managed water systems for other things. We're benefiting a few people that the agency sees as its customers. Same with hounding of bobcats or other species. It's for the few, and it's at the great cost to many of us and to many other species of animals.
So, in conclusion, what you're saying is typically uh, species as a whole, but we'll focus on fur bearers, are not managed for their own benefit. They're managed for a select user group. They're not managed for the whole population of a state. But again, that specific user group, we aren't taking in ecosystem health as a metric to shape our policies. And our on-off switch is quite drastic, pretty much as extreme as it can be. And so agencies need to align themselves with uh, possibly still allowing these practices to take place, but letting that be something that is not a right, but uh, a privilege if an ecosystem can take it.
Right. I think, Mark, what we're seeing is that fur bearers are really symbolic of the larger plight we face in working with wildlife agencies, that these were systems not created for us, but that were created for hunters and trappers. And these are policies that are not created for animals, but were created for hunters and trappers. And so the question we're answering often at these agencies is how many bobcats can we kill? Not how do we have the healthiest ecosystems? And we need to rephrase and reshape these questions. Without asking different questions, we're just going to have the same problems over and over again. And states have been managing wildlife for this long, and look at we've gotten right into a biodiversity crisis and climate crisis. You know, what we're doing isn't working anymore. It's not working. And unfortunately, it's going to take reshaping these institutions because the decision makers are often hunters and trappers that have a vested interest in keeping the status quo. We have to reshape these institutions, and we need more people to get involved in these issues in their states.
Okay, so I think you just answered a little bit of my question that I'm stealing from my co-host, Samantha Miller, who's unfortunately not here to be a co-host today. How can people make change, whether in Colorado or in other states, around fur bearer issues?
So I would say familiarize yourself with your state policies. They're very likely similar to Colorado's. They're very likely unlimited for most species of fur bearers. Familiarize yourself with your state Fish and Wildlife Commission or state game commission. Those are often the people that make decisions for wildlife. So you have agency people, those are staff who work, but commissions are the people that make decisions. Often governors appoint commissions, so it's a very political process all the way through. So depending on who your governor is, that could very much impact how your commission is made up. And then also start engaging in these processes. In our state, for example, we filed a rulemaking petition with the Center for Biological Diversity to stop the commercial sale of fur bearer furs. So saying we shouldn't be selling these furs of these wild animals, especially when we allow them to be killed in unlimited numbers. It makes no sense. We don't live in a time where we need fur bearer furs to stay warm. It says nothing about game farms or any of those other kind of, the fur farm crap, which is just a whole other issue. It says our wildlife should not be trapped, killed, and sold in Colorado. Low bar. But you can file rulemaking petitions within your state, find conservation groups within your state that are interested in these kinds of reforms, and then look at legislation. You have friendly legislators in most states that would be interested in one of these issues, right? Wildfire being one of them, ecosystems being another important one, and looking at ways that you can make changes to law is another really empowering way to make shifts for wild animals too.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last piece on there, like you mentioned, most commissions for wildlife agencies are appointed by the governor. So asking a candidate for governor, what are their policies on wildlife before you vote on them, or before you vote for that person, and then ask specific policies. And if they can't answer it, either uh, in, inform them or vote for someone else who does think more broader. Like wildlife should always be something that every candidate for every office should have some sort of answer for in some capacity. And then that extends to our legislator or our city councils even. So making our officials know that they have a responsibility to their constituents that don't have voting privileges is incredibly important. I will leave it there Samantha Miller, it was so great to have you as a guest on the Wildlife Wire. It's been too long. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I've been nervous. So thank you for playing part of guest today, and I hope our audience got, or I know that they received a wealth of information, and always put it to good use. If you have questions about it, can they contact you, or how do they go about finding help?
You can find me on Instagram at Biodiversity Cowgirl. I'm there. You can also find me on the Center for Biological Diversity's website, and we have all sorts of really great materials on biologicaldiversity.org on a lot of these issues. And my email address, everything is posted on there. So I'm available to anyone who wants to talk at any time, Mark.
Wonderful. Well, I'm happy to have you back as co-host in our next episode, but this was delightful.
Thanks, Mark.
This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.